Hi, this tutorial will explain how to run the EMFStore with a custom model. I will take the library model as an example. We have already configured that model and prepared it to run with the EMFStore in previous video tutorials. If you didn't do that or you don't want to do it, you can just download the example model projects from our SVN repository. The link is on this web link, and finally there is also a link to the SVN repository where you can see how to configure. And finally there is a link to the EMFStore configuration page where you can see how to change the EMFStore default configuration, for example, where you can change the location the EMFStore stores its data to. I will just run with the default configuration in this tutorial and open up my Eclipse. I already have the two plugins, the example model and example model edit plugin, and I will first of all configure a debug configuration to run the EMFStore. So I select Eclipse application and a new configuration, and we'll call that EMFStore server, and I will select to run it as a product with the EMFStore server. In plugins, I have just the default configuration, all workspace and enable target plugins, which means it will also pick up the two model plugins that I have in my workspace. I will click on apply and then on debug, and that will run the EMFStore as a headless application, so it will run in the console. And I can see here that the EMFStore is loading. It will create the default configuration, and it will also show where it's running from. So it's storing its data currently in .unicase EMFStore in the user home, which is the default location, and it tells me that it is running on the default port 8443 and the server is running. So the next thing I will do is I will bring up a client application for the EMFStore. I can do that by just adding another debug configuration. I will call that EMFStore client, and again it contains all plugins from the workspace, but I will just run it as a product org Eclipse platform IDE, and that's already basically it. So I will just apply that and debug it, and that will now bring up a second Eclipse instance. And since I installed the EMFStore client and client UI features, I will also have some views in that setting where I can see what kind of models are stored on the EMFStore. Okay, I will close the welcome screen, and first of all I will bring up the first view to have a look at the server. That view is in other Unicase and it's called EMFStore browser. It's very much comparable to the SVN browser, and it shows all the available repositories and the projects that you can access there. There is an extension point where you configure which repositories are shown as a default if you want to have any. In my case that was our Unicase server, but if you didn't configure any it will just look empty, and you can add a new repository here. I will call it localhost and the URL is localhost since I want to access the server that I have just started. The port we have seen is 8443, and a certificate, you just choose the test certificate. Of course you can, it's a development certificate and it's used to encrypt the connection between server and client. Of course you can generate a new one. It's described on the EMFStore homepage to make your connection secure. Okay, now I have that node and I can just expand that node. That will ask me to log in. The default username for the server administrator is super and the password is also super, and I will just store that. Of course you can also change that in the configuration. And now I can already connect to the EMFStore and I will see all the projects that I have access to, and currently that is 0 because I don't have any project on the server, but I can create a new one by right clicking and saying create new project. I'll call it test project. And now I have a test project on the server. Since I'm this super user, I can have access to any project and I can check out that project. Now checkout will do the exact same thing that SVN checkout does, so it just creates a copy in my local workspace of that project, so whenever I disconnect I'm still having my project. And to view all the checkout projects I can bring up another view of Unicase. If you have a full-blown application that you build on the EMFStore, you'll probably have your own view for that, but for development purposes it's useful to just use the Unicase navigator. You can bring that up here. And now I can see that I currently only have one project checked out. A project in our sense is a container for models, and also access control is dependent on models, so you can tell that the user has read or write access to a certain project. Currently the project is empty, but I will create a new model element for that project. And now EMFStore picked up all the models that are available in this workspace and its library. So I can create an instance of the library model. I will first create a book, and then I will create also a writer. I can see those in the project, and for the book I want to give it a title. So and the writer will get a name. And of course I can also link the book, for example, to the author. And note that this view that you see now is also a default view that you get with the client UI feature. It's called the model element editor, and it's a reflective editor that helps you to edit your models. Probably if you build an application you will have your own editor, but for development purposes it's a good first shot where you can start with. And now the important thing is how do I share the changes that I have done with the repository. You can do that by right-clicking on the project node and saying commit. That will commit your changes to the repository. You can enter a commit message, and it has sent these changes to the repository. I can, for example, check out a second copy of the same project and change something here. Change the writer name to him and commit that change. And now I can update in the other project, and of course the author name will be set to the new name. Now all these views that you have seen, the commit and the update views, there are views that are in the client UI feature. Of course you can programmatically access this UI, this whole API as well, and use your own views to commit or update or whatever you want to do with the local workspaces. Now another interesting feature that is already in here, you can change the name here, and we change the name here. And now when I commit this change in this workspace, the server now has an updated name for the writer, while this project has also changed the name. And when I commit now, it will tell me that I need to update first, and it will bring up a merge dialog and tell me that I have changed the name of the writer him to him too, while the attribute was changed on the server to she. So I can either choose to keep my change or keep the change on the repository. So I will keep my change, of course, and commit that to repository. And if I update here again, then I will see that this is reflected in the repository. So in the client UI feature there is dialogues for committing, updating and merging. And also what might be interesting is, of course, all these artifacts are versioned, so you can also have a look at the version history. There is a history browser that also ships with the client UI feature, and here you can see that in version 3, for example, I've set the name in writer from him to she. And of course I can also open the model elements below from that view. So basically it displays the operations that I have made, and then as children the involved model elements. For example, in version 1 there is a more interesting change. I have set the author in book to writer him too, and here you can see the involved model elements. Furthermore, there is of course API to check out a certain version of a project, or even to bring your project back to a certain version. So you can, for example, here select this version and say I want to check out this version, and it was version 2, and I can say, for example, instead of updating it to the head revision, I can just say, okay, I want to update that to revision 3. So you can see it's a project where the writer is still called she, and if I update again to the head revision, then it's called him too. So basically all the versions that you ever committed to the repository are available, and you can browse them here in the history browser, check out a specific version, and of course all the calls used for that are also in the Workspace API that you can just use programmatically. Okay, I hope in this tutorial you could see what you can do with the EMFStore and have fun.